All right, so this morning we're going to be talking about math lesson 7.7, and that is comparing fractions. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is show you some quick look cards. Tell me what fraction is shaded. And you should have said 2/4 because the circle's divided into 4 parts. 2 are shaded. Tell me what fraction is shaded. And you should have said 2 out of 2 or 1 whole. The half circle's divided into 2 parts and both are shaded. And you should have said 1/2 because the quarter circle's divided into 2 parts and 1 is shaded. All right, so right now what I want you to do is look at these 3 shapes. So triangle, rectangle, circle. Tell me which of those shapes is pretty close, almost 1/2 shaded. All right, so I hope you said the triangle. If that line came straight down from the top point here, it would have been 1/2. So it's almost 1/2. All right, so with the ones remaining, tell me which one is greater than 1/2. And that would be the circle because the biggest part of that circle is shaded. And so the rectangle then would be less than 1/2 because the shaded area is much smaller than the unshaded area. Okay, so we're gonna, excuse me, we're gonna talk about comparing fractions on a number line. So I have made my number line here, okay? And our benchmarks are, remember, things that we know. So on a number line, we know 0, we know 1, and in between that would be 1/2. So those are our benchmarks because that is what we know. All right. So a fraction that is greater than 1/2 is going to be closer to 1. It's going to be on the right side of the fraction, or of 1/2 on my number line. And a fraction that is smaller than or less than 1/2 is going to be on the left side. It's going to be closer to 0. Okay, so that's how I'm going to find those on my number line. If it lines up exactly with 1/2, then it is an equivalent fraction to 1/2. Okay, so I'm going to use my fraction strips that I made the other day for the other lesson. So there is a strip divided into 2 parts, and I'm going to get my fourths. So if I line these up on the end, like I showed you the other day, here is my 1/2. So how many fourths are equivalent to 1/2? 1, 2. All right, so I can write that right here. 2/4 would be another name for 1/2. They're equivalent, okay? So then, again, using my strips, here I have 1/4, all right? And that's about in the middle of that 1/2 area, so I have gone ahead and marked that one. So this would be 1/4. And if I were to divide that into those 4 parts, over here, I would have 1, 2, 3, about in between the 1/2 and the 1. So this is 3/4. Okay, so those are, I know that 1/4 is going to be less than 1/2. I know that 3/4 is going to be greater than 1/2. Okay. I want to add some others, so let me, since we've got our fourths on the number line, let me just go ahead and use that one. And let me get my strip for 8ths. So if I go to my 1/2, which we said was 2/4, how many 8ths do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4. So another equivalent fraction for 1/2 would be 4/8. if I use my fraction strip and find 1/4, how many eighths would be in 1/4? 1, 2. So I'm going to have 2 eighths is the same thing as 1/4. So dividing that into 2 spaces, I could have 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, and so if I had my 3/4, 1, 2, 3, so that lines up right here, and I 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So then I would have 7/8. Now, my whole is always going to be same number in the numerator and the denominator. So I could have 2 halves, 2/2. I could have 4/4, 4 out of 4. I could have 8/8. All going to be 1. For my 0 over here, that's no parts shaded. So it would be 0 out of 2, 0 out of 4, and 0 out of 8. All right, I want to include a couple more here. So I'm going to go back to my half. And I'm going to put my thirds down here. All right, so you see there's nothing that's equivalent in thirds to my half. All right, so I want to mark, let's see if I go, what, about right here? And about right here, maybe? Okay, and so that is going to be 1/3 and 2/3. Okay. You mark those so you can see them just a little bit better on the number line. And if I were to divide those in half, I have my 6ths. All right, so now if I put my half up here, there's going to be an equivalent fraction this time. Okay, because here's 1/2. My line lines up 1, 2, 3, 6. All right, so if I were to take this 1/3 and I just kind of run my finger along there and kind of come up with, so this would be, where did I put it? 1/6 and 2/6, which is going to be just about equal with, what's going to be equal with my 1/3. Okay, and then I'm going to have 4/6. So I'm going to have 5/6, and of course my equivalent to 1 would be 6/6, and my equivalent to 0 would be 0/6. All right, so it gets kind of confusing when you get all of these in here, but this gives us an idea. Actually, a way to make that look a little bit more clear would be to make separate number lines on them. Okay, and I don't think you guys can download this, but I'll show you in a minute how you could make one of your own. So here's my whole. Okay, there's no division, 0 to 1. This one says halves. So at 0, I would have 0 out of 2. It's divided into 2. My whole would be 2 out of 2. Okay, and this would be 1/2. If I divide that into fourths, I would have 0 would be 0/4. My whole would be 4/4. This would be 2/4, 1/4, and 3/4. All right, so dividing that one more time into eighths, 0 out of 8, 8 out of 8. So if I just go right on across, 1 out of 8, 2 out of 8, 3 out of 8, 4 out of 8, 5 out of 8, 6 out of 8, not writing over that very well, and 7 out of 8. Okay, and then thirds, so my 0 would be 0 out of 3. My 1 would be 3 out of 3, and this would be 1 out of 3, and 2 out of 3. And divide that one more time into 6, so we'd have 0 out of 6 would be my 0. 6 out of 6 would be my whole. And just moving right across again, I would have 1 out of 6, 2 out of 6, 3 out of 6, 4 out of 6, 5 out of 6. Okay, and so this way I can compare those fractions a little more easily. So if I were to put any kind of a straight edge along here, okay, I could see that my 1/2 lines up with my 2/4, with my 4/8, and with my 3/6. I can see that 3/4 lines up with 6/8. I can see that my 1/4 lines up with 2/8. So this is going to help me use those benchmarks that I've already established to see where a fraction is. So if we were to use this, what are some fractions that are less than 1/2? So remember we said that would be to the left of half and closer to 0. So 1/4 is going to fall in that area. So that is a fraction that is less than 1/2. Okay? 3/8 to the left of that side. So 1/8, 2/8, 3/8 are all less than 1/2. Okay? 1/3. You know, if I use my paper as a straight edge even here, 1/3 is closer to 0. So that is less than 1/2. 3/6 lines up with my 1/2. So 2/6 and 1/6 are less than 1/2. All right, so what were the fractions that we said were equivalent to 1/2? We have 2/4. We have 4/8. And we have 3/6. And so then our fractions that are greater are going to be on the right side. So 3/4 is going to be closer to that 1. 5/8, 6/8, and 7/8. Okay, 2/3. Whoops, hit my button again there. 4/6 and 5/6. All right. So what they want us to do on this page is to choose 2 of our fractions that are less than 1/2. So anything from this box you could choose. I'm going to choose 1/8, and I'm going to choose, yeah, let's do 1/3. Okay. So of these 2 fractions, which one is closer to 0? So if I go back here to my number line, here's my 8ths, here's 1/8, here's my 1/3. Which one's closer to 0? 1/8. How do I know that? It is farther to the left of 1/2. And I can just see on my number line that it is closer to the 0. So what would my number sentence be to compare those 2 fractions? So 1/8 is less than 1/3. Okay, so now they want me to choose 2 fractions that are greater than 1/2. So let's do what? 5/8, and let's do 5/6. Okay. So of these two fractions, which one is closer to 1? So I want to go back to my number line that I made here, and I have 5/8, which is right here, and I have 5/6. Which one is closer to 1? 5/6. How do I know? This one is farther to the right on my number line. So what would, I want to use greater than this time. So if 5/6 is greater than 5/8, okay, using my number line as a benchmark to find those things. So let me show you here how you could do this. Just take a piece of paper, okay, fold it so that you've got that half mark, okay? And you're going to use a straight edge to draw a line. Doesn't have to be the whole page. That's fine. So let me just make mine, since I'm doing it the long way, let's make it 10 inches, okay? That is my hole. So you kind of want to keep it the same size. So if I draw another one, whoops, my pencil didn't go all the way. Okay, and since I folded my paper, or use my ruler, either way, I can line that up at my 5, and so this would be 1/2. This would be my 0 halves, and this would be 2 halves. Okay, line it up again. Yeah, my pencil's not wanting to draw that first part. All right, so this time, again, I know my half, so this would be 2 out of 4, 0 out of 4, 4 out of 4, okay? And, I can either measure it. So half of that would be 2 1/2, so that would be 1/4. And 3/4. Okay, so then I can do that again for my 8ths. So my hole would be 8 out of 8. My 0 would be 0 out of 8. Middle would be 4 out of 8. So this would be 2 out of 8. So this would be 1 out of 8. 2 out of 8. 3 out of 8, so forth. For my thirds, so my 1 would be 3/3, 0 thirds, and that would be, if I made it 10 inches, that would be somewhere right about there, and somewhere right about there, pretty close. So 1/3 and 2/3. Okay, and my last one, then I could do one more to make my 6, and that's really as far as you need to go. And then that gives you the separate number lines. So this would be 6 out of 6, 0 out of 6. My middle would be 3 out of 6, and so yeah, that wasn't very close. Probably right about here and right about here. 1/3 or 2/6 and 3/6, 1/6, 2/6. Sorry. All right. And then I could go ahead and divide the other side as well. So that would give you a number line to use for comparison. So that's just something that you could do pretty quickly on your own. All right. So I think that pretty much covers our lesson. So then we can use these benchmarks again, using our 0, using our half, and using our 1 as benchmarks to compare our fractions. All right, that's it for math today. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you next week.